So we'll call this meeting of the General Government Committee to order. We're joined by my colleagues, Councilor Govan from Ward 8 and Councilor Edwards from Ward 3. Councilor Edwards is a member of the committee. Thank you for joining. And the purpose for today's meeting is to talk about Rule 54. I also had on the agenda any carryover items that were left from 2021. But Councilor Edwards did such a good job that there's no carryover. There's nothing else for us to do. So Councilor Allen asked that we take a look at Rule 54. And Councilor Govan, for your benefit, I'll just tell you what it does. So the rule was introduced by me for the first time last year because we were having a whole bunch of meetings go pretty late. And particularly as we went towards remote, finding that elected officials, myself included, get a lot more comfy at home and maybe can talk a little bit longer than would happen ordinarily in the chambers. So our meetings were going very long and we weren't being very productive. And so that's what kind of led to some tired people and me proposing this rule. So welcome, Councilor Letterman. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So we're talking about our only agenda item, which is Rule 54. And I was just telling Councilor Govan how it came to be. And so basically the issue is that sometimes our meetings go past 10 o'clock and that's okay. But the rule says in its current form, no meeting shall go beyond 10 o'clock unless all members present unanimously agree. If any member present objects to going beyond 10 p.m., all remaining items shall be continued until the next regularly scheduled city council meeting. So the problem is that it's a little confusing what that means because sometimes it gets to be 10 o'clock and, you know, President Williams hasn't really been sure about how to handle this. Do we take a vote? Do we just wait until somebody objects? If we wait until somebody objects, what if we're in the middle of business and, you know, we got a new matter and it went on for 45 minutes and now somebody gets frustrated and says, that's it, I want to go home. And so those are all very appropriate critiques. And so I was thinking about it, talking with some other counselors, and I think maybe the best way to do it is just to amend the rule to say, we can go past 10, but if it gets to be 10 o'clock, then we have to take a vote on how long we'd like to continue for. And it has to be unanimous. So for example, if it gets to be 10 o'clock, then Marcus would stop the meeting and say, okay, does anybody have a motion to go past 10 o'clock? And if so, how late would you like to go? You know, 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. And then if it passes unanimously, then we'll continue. But if anybody's had enough, then in fairness, we all go to bed.
Since there's only 4 of us, I'm just going to jump in there. I think that's appropriate. I mean, the thing is when you force people to have to make a decision, you know, just to keep up with the majority, obviously any counselor at any time can leave and bow out of a meeting. In terms of the clarity, I think it's appropriate. The issue about setting a time, maybe if we can inject a little bit of common sense into the process, whereas in some cases it's pretty obviously that we can get this done in 15 minutes. But as you said, if we're in the middle of an issue and we're discussing it, sometimes it's hard to determine exactly how long that's going to take. So if we could just put some type of wording in or have some type of agreement that if we're in the middle of an item, we're going to finish this item, or this agenda item number 5 or 6 is the next one we're going to do, and we're going to stop after that. So, you know, it's not as I mean, maybe I'm not as articulate as I need to be in this regard, but I'm okay with the 10 o'clock unanimous vote. And because quite often that's what happens. We're close enough to where we need to be finished, but it may take more than 10 minutes, it may take 5 minutes, it may take a half hour. It just depends on how the flow of things are and how much our counselors feel the need to be heard.
I agree. What do you think, Councilors Govan and Letterman.
Well, if I may, as the freshman counselor, I heard rumors about your late meetings. So when I got elected, I said, oh my gosh, I don't want to stay. But you're absolutely right, Councilor Fenton, that, when you're on Zoom, it's a lot more comfortable and you could just, sit back so you can talk all night long, as opposed to being at City Hall where people want to get home. So I think it's a valid rule, and it sounds like it's something that's you guys have discussed, and it sounds reasonable.
Councilor Letterman, what do you think?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, as folks know, I'm not the biggest fan of the rule, but as far as application of it goes, I appreciate the meeting being called to clarify it, because I think my only concern, and in practice, we actually haven't really seen it used all that much. I mean, for the most part, we've wrapped.
No, I think just twice.
We've only seen it used twice. So my only concern is just relative to the folks coming before the council with agenda items who might be sitting and waiting, and then sort of being surprised and or disappointed that their item doesn't get heard. So I like the idea of taking a vote at 10 o'clock of some sort. I think that clarifies it a lot and leaves a lot less certainty for people, because before it would hit 10 and then it was just kind of like, oh, maybe you get heard, maybe you don't. So I think taking the vote works. I think my only question on taking the vote on how long to proceed is I certainly, I don't want us to get bogged down in debate then about how long to proceed, So I don't know if we should just vote to finish the agenda, or as Councilor Edwards said, sometimes there's items that just need a procedural vote, that don't even, don't need debate. We could take those and then wrap. So I'm not sure exactly how to handle that, but I do support and like taking a vote at 10 on something, so that's just clear for everybody in the audience. Either you're going to get heard tonight, or listen, it's going to get rescheduled.
All right, I'm just writing a proposal to review with you. 1 second. I got to make sure there's nobody in the waiting room. Hang on. No, just us. All right. Is not. Okay. All right, so currently, let me read you the current rule, and then I'll read you the rule that I just typed out. So currently it says, no meeting of the city council shall go beyond 10 p.m. unless all members present unanimously agree. If any member present objects to going beyond 10 p.m., all remaining items shall be continued until the next regularly scheduled meeting. As we discussed, that creates some confusion. Oh, Justin's asking to be admitted. Let me make sure. And we're also joined by Councilor Hurst. Councilor Hurst, thank you for joining us. We're just discussing Rule 54. Okay, so I'm going to read again what the current rule is and then what the proposed changes that I'm proposing. No meeting of City Council shall go beyond 10 p.m. unless all members present agree unanimously. If any member present objects to going beyond 10 p.m., all remaining items shall be continued until the next regularly scheduled council meeting. So the problem is that creates some ambiguity around whether or not somebody can object at any time, or if there should be a vote at that moment. So the language I just put together that I'd like us to discuss before putting it on our next regular meeting agenda is to change the rule to read this. No meeting of the city council shall go beyond 10 p.m. unless, upon a motion of any councilor, the meeting is extended for a period of time stated in the motion, so long as the motion is unanimously approved by all members present. If a motion to extend the meeting is not approved, all remaining items shall be continued until the next regularly scheduled meeting of the city council. So that would force us to, at 10 o'clock, take a vote and somebody say, all right, I make a motion, we go for another 15 minutes or another hour or whatever. And then if it gets unanimously approved, then great. And if it doesn't, then we stop. And if it gets approved and then we run out of time, you could always do another motion for another 15 minutes or whatever.
I'm okay with that.
I think it clears up some, ambiguity. And does anybody object to doing it that way?
You're muted.
I'm sorry, I have a question. So what Jesse brought up regarding any outside people, I guess, who maybe are there and are waiting to be heard, is there any way to possibly prevent that from happening? Because I think I agree. I would hate to be on the list and be waiting, and then it's past 10 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock I'm told, oh, well, it's over. Is there any way to prevent that from happening at all?
Not really.
Well, I mean, the challenge with that, Councilor Govan, is that in order to take an item out of the enumerated agenda, there has to be a motion to do that, and nobody can object. So let's say we're on like item 23 and it's a 30-item agenda, and then it hits 10 o'clock. And, there's somebody who's been waiting all night, but their item
Right.
isn't until item number 26.
Right.
Well, you couldn't get to them out of order unless somebody made a motion to do that. So the way to fix it would be, let's say we get to 10 o'clock, we're on item 23. You make a motion and say, I propose that we go for another 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes, I think that we should take the following items out of order because these people have been waiting, and everybody else, let's leave them. And then, if everybody unanimously agreed, then we could do that out of order, and we could go for another 15 minutes. I don't think there's an easy way to bake that into this rule, though, because there might be, for example, some people who want to go for another 15 minutes, but who think it's unfair to skip the line for somebody who, has been waiting, who's a resident versus a department head. I mean, there's always a discussion about how to do that. So I think
So that would be my only issue.
Yeah.
My only question, I should say.
Yeah.
I think Councilor Hurst has his hand up as the
Oh.
let him in.
Sorry about that. I'm not used to that. So I don't know who raised first, but Councilor Hurst, because
Yes.
you haven't talked. So go ahead.
I think my only concern, and it's not necessarily with the rule, Counselor, it's with where those items that are left off fit into the next agenda. Because what I saw happen is that these items would be continued, and then they would end up in the same place, which naturally is towards the end of the agenda at our next regular meeting. And so these same individuals would end up being there until 10 o'clock with the risk of being skipped on multiple meetings. And that is extremely problematic. So I don't know how you work that out with the president, but it would seem to me that these items ought to be heard as close to first at our next regular meeting as possible. So it would seem to me that folks ought to take that into consideration and figure out how to make that work somehow.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think we should put another provision at the end of this rule that says, if items are continued to the next meeting pursuant to this rule, those items shall appear at the beginning of the next agenda.
Actually, that should be a courtesy anyway for all meetings, all agenda items. I mean, if somebody's on an agenda and they don't get their thing heard, and then they have to get put back down the list, that just seems like common courtesy. And I mean, not aside from what we're trying to do with this, Rule 54. Just that's my thought. Sorry, Councilor Letterman. I didn't mean to jump in.
No, I'll let Councilor Letterman. I'll turn it over to you in a second, Jesse. But I think that's right, and I think it's probably just an oversight in the past, not thinking to do that. That's all. Councilor Letterman.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that's great. And the only piece I think that I would add is relative to Councilor Edwards' previous point. If we're in the middle of an agenda item at 10, do we finish that agenda item and then take up this motion, or is this automatically like a hard stop and then we take up the motion immediately and then proceed forward?
I have an opinion on the subject, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I would say that if we're in the middle of something and it hits 10 o'clock, we still got to vote because, I mean, let's say, it's 9:55 and we start a new thing on, the police commission or something controversial.
Yeah,
that could go for an hour.
Yeah.
So I think that even if you're in the middle of something, you still, I would say, to make the rule work and make sense, you really got to have the vote no matter what. And if you're in the middle of something, it just gets continued, or maybe your motion is, I move that we continue the meeting until this matter is resolved, right? Just this matter. You don't have to say, time certain.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay.
all right. So, Counselor Hurst.
Just a quick question. Are we referring to our regular meetings, or is this also applicable to our hearings meetings? And I only say that because, folks might, that if we use that sort of analysis when it comes to the hearings meeting, I could totally see that if that is continued, what happens if, you don't necessarily have the same counselors at the next hearings meeting? I mean, it seems like there poses a problem there, but
well, I mean, the attendance issue is going to be the attendance issue no matter what. But I see your point about the difference between the hearings meetings and the regular meetings, and it's the line is grayed in a way that it wasn't previously because of our COVID procedures and how we've been, conducting the hearings, continuing them to another meeting. And so is your concern, Councilor Hurst, that we could have be in the middle of a hearing, have to continue it, and then when we come back, a counselor couldn't participate at the next meeting because they weren't there for the first hearing?
maybe that's the same issue that we have now anyway.
Yes.
Maybe that's the same issue that we deal with now, the more I think about it. So maybe there's not a difference. I'd have to think through it a little bit more. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe we're already dealing with that issue now, the more I think about it. Is that what you were going to say, Councilor Edwards?
Yes, I think that it's not a solvable problem because we're all taking oaths to be there, and unfortunately things happen in our lives, so sometimes we just can't make it back at the other meeting. But recently, people who were not at the meeting were afforded the opportunity to read, like the new counselors that came on, they were allowed to read. So I think that COVID has, and the fact that we're doing it on Zoom has given us some extra leadway on how to manage these circumstances when they do occur.
Fair enough. Scratch that concern.
Yeah,
it's a legitimate concern. I mean, it was a very legitimate point. It's just I'm not sure how solvable it is. I mean, aside from the fact that some of our colleagues just kind of talk a long time.
Yeah, me too. And well, I agree with that. It's a problem.
Guilty.
I'm not sure it's a solvable one. All right, so let me read the draft of the rule in its current form. No meeting of the city council shall go beyond 10 p.m. unless, upon a motion of any councilor, the meeting is extended for a period of time stated in the motion, so long as the motion is unanimously approved by all members present. If a motion to extend the meeting is not approved, all remaining items shall be continued to the next scheduled meeting of the city council. If items are continued to the next meeting pursuant to this rule, those items shall appear at the beginning of the next agenda. It doesn't address the regular meeting versus the hearings meeting, but other than that, I think it's pretty good.
May I make a motion to recommend, as a member of the committee, that is a motion that this is the recommendation that we send back to the committee of whole for consideration?
Thank you. I will. Thank you, Councilor Govan. I will second the motion. And Councilor Govan, just only Councilor Edwards and I can vote on this because we're the two members of the committee.
I'm not on this committee.
Not according to the assignments I got. It says.
So I'm trying to find the list. I just asked Councilor Letterman, my go-to always, what committees I was on, because I wasn't sure.
You're on sustainability and environment.
Right.
With Jesse as the chair. You are on
Health and Human Services. You're on finance.
Yes.
I just forwarded it to you, Councilor Govan.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And
But you're always welcome to all meetings anyway.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. And we're very interested in your feedback, but.
Well, if I can,
before-
that's why I came today, because I wasn't sure if I was on it, but if I have the time, I do like to, be in attendance and just be informed.
Mr.
Well,
Chair,
I appreciate it.
who's the third member of this committee?
Counselor Walsh.
Oh, Councilor Walsh. Okay.
Okay, so there's a motion by Counselor Edwards, seconded by Counselor Fenton. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion, Counselor Edwards,
Aye.
and I am also aye. That's a yes. So I'm going to email Marcus and Gladys now. I'll ask them to put this change on the agenda for the next meeting. Because it's a change to our rules after we've approved our rules, it'll require 2/3. Anything else? I put all other business, but there is no other business because Melvin did such a good job last year. There's no carryover items from 2020. 2021, we're in 2022, geez. All right, thank you,
Well
everybody.
done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jesse.
Bye.
No worries.
Welcome
Bye-bye.
again, Councilor Govan. I hope you enjoy your experience. And
I appreciate it.
I was very happy to hear you on the committee meeting earlier with your neighborhood council and the COVID. That was very gracious of you and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
And Councilor Fenton, I will be reaching out shortly, well, not shortly, but whenever you have some time, special permits, a review. I think general government might be the most appropriate committee to do that type of review. And before, as we're moving toward the last quarter of the year, I had conversations right after the McDonald's situation with Kathy Brown. And she had been, this has been a pet peeve of hers in that neighborhood. And I think even Indian Orchard, Pine Point has had a problem with special permits historically.
Yeah,
Like
well, we'll put it on for, discussion of administration of special permits and how the city handles those issues, because certainly we got some work to do there, so.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. It's just whenever you're ready, and if you want to do some legwork ahead of time, just so we come into it clearly. And it's not, my purpose is not to embarrass anybody or attack, it's just, but the system isn't as efficient as it should be, which was reflected in the exchange between one of the lieutenants recently. They don't seem to quite understand what they're supposed to do. And, they didn't know that, like the lieutenant didn't know that the fire department can write permits for alarms.
Well, I agree with you completely. Let's finish that conversation offline and we'll set a meeting up to discuss it with those stakeholders.
That'd be great. Thank you. And stay healthy, everybody.
You too.
COVID's no joke, so be careful, please.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
All right, you
Good night.
too.